धरती लोक नहीं है, इस यमलोक है, यमलोक। समझे तो?
गोल्डमैन सिग्नल्स नहीं आ रहा इसमें, सिग्नल्स नहीं आ रहा इसमें।
अरे चुप हो जा, पता नहीं क्या क्या बकते हैं ये। बुढ़ा? मुझे बुढ़ा कहा तुम?
फिर क्या है?
तुम्हें यम को आने दो, तुम्हें ज्यादा से ज्यादा पनिशमेंट दिलाओ।
सीरियस मत लो।
मैं देखता हूँ कि यहाँ भीड़ ज्यादा हो रही है। इनसे बोल के एक नोट लिखता हूँ, उनसे थोड़ा सा स्वर्ग में जमीन मांग लूंगा, ठीक है? अच्छा, यहाँ भीड़ बढ़ने का कारण क्या है? चलो यम दर्पण में देखते हैं। ओम यमाय नमः, ओम यमाय नमः। ये क्या? आतंकवाद, बम विस्फोट, ट्रेन एक्सीडेंट, भ्रष्टाचार
और नींबू का अचार।
अरे चुप! अरे भ्रष्टाचार ही भ्रष्टाचार, ये क्या है? हे प्रभु, ये मैं नहीं देख सकता। प्रभु तुम कहाँ हो प्रभु? जी प्रभु,
यमलोक में ये क्या सनक आता रहा है?
प्रभु पता नहीं, यमलोक पे धरती पर इतना अत्याचार प्रभु, ये क्या है प्रभु? इसका कारण क्या है?
लालच, धन पे लालच, जरूरत से ज्यादा कमाने की तमन्ना ऐसी होती है। इस प्रकृति में मानव का सृष्टि महत्वपूर्ण है। द्वापर युग तक मानव की चिंतन में एक आध्यात्मिकता और धार्मिकता थी, लेकिन इस कलयुग में मानव का सोच बदल गया है। उसकी सुख संपत्ति के लिए पैसा का सृष्टि किया और उसको पाने के लिए क्या क्या दुर्दशा नहीं पाया ही नहीं। आखिर खुद का परिवार को धोखा देने लगा। इसी का अंजाम यह बम विस्फोट, यह अत्याचार, बलात्कार, भ्रष्टाचार।
अच्छा प्रभु, आप ही कहते थे ना कि जो जैसा कर्म करता है उसे उसी लोक में उसी वैसे ही सजा मिलता है।
भला चित्रगुप्त भला, सुख अच्छा काम का सुख और संतोष से मिलेगा और दुर्दशा का बुरा काम का हाल वो दर्द और दुख से मिलेगा। लेकिन मानव यह समझ नहीं पा रहा है, फिर भी पैसे पाने के लिए और काम, क्रोध, लोभ, मोद, मद और मत्सर के सहित उसको पाने के लिए गलत रास्ता अपनाया है। इसीलिए आज का ये दुर्दशा है। यदि मानव ये समझाता होते, किसी को नरक नहीं आना होता।
अच्छा प्रभु, यहाँ भीड़ बढ़ गया प्रभु। मैंने एक टिप्पणी लिखी है, इनसे कह के थोड़ा सा स्वर्ग लोक पे जमीन मांग लेते हैं।
चित्रगुप्त
जी प्रभु।
दंड देने का मकसद किसी को चोट पहुंचाना नहीं, लेकिन परिवर्तन लाना चाहता हूं मैं। परिवर्तन, यदि मानव परिवर्तन हो जाएगा फिर कभी भी गलत काम नहीं करता। ठीक है, सवाल शुरू किया जाए।
जैसी आपकी इच्छा प्रभु। ये दुष्ट प्राणी विजय कुमार के नाम से धरती पे जाना जाता है प्रभु। ये कल्याण निरीक्षक के रूप में काम करता था। बिना पैसे लिए कोई काम नहीं करता था, कभी कभी पैसे लेके भी काम नहीं करता था प्रभु।
क्या विजय कुमार जी, आप कुछ कहना चाहते हैं इसके बारे में?
मैं तो बिल्कुल भ्रष्टाचारी नहीं हूँ। ऊपर का प्रेशर आने से मेरे को करना पड़ा।
खामोश! सरकारी नौकरी है करके तुम ये सब कर रहे थे। यदि यही नहीं होता तो क्या करते थे तुम? चित्रगुप्त
प्रभु,
इसको उबले हुए तेल में डाल दिया जाए।
जैसी आपकी इच्छा प्रभु। प्रभु, ये दुष्ट प्राणी राजकुमार के नाम से जाना जाता था प्रभु।
इसका गुनाह क्या है?
प्रभु, ये तो बिना पैसे लिए कुछ भी नहीं करता था प्रभु। पैसे देना और पैसे लेना इसका काम ही था। न जाने खुद भ्रष्ट होके कितने आदमियों को बस किया। इससे सरकारी धन को बहुत नुकसान पहुंचा प्रभु।
राजकुमार, आप क्या कहना चाहते हैं इसके बारे में?
प्रभु, पैसा में परमात्मा है प्रभु।
पैसा में परमात्मा? परमात्मा को पाने के लिए सही रास्ता चुनना होगा, ये गलत रास्ता नहीं। चित्रगुप्त
जी प्रभु। इस
पापी को मगरमच्छ के बीच में डाल दिया जाए।
जैसी आपकी इच्छा प्रभु। प्रभु प्रभु, ये दुष्ट आत्मा पापियों का पापी महापापी गणेश के रूप में जाना जाता है प्रभु।
आई ऑब्जेक्ट योर ऑनर।
खामोश! यह जमलोक है, हमारे सिवा कोई बात नहीं कर सकते।
प्रभु, ये रेलवे में टीटी का नौकरी करता था प्रभु। बिना पैसे लिए किसी की मदद नहीं करता था। कभी कभी तो पैसे लेके उसको कुछ वो कहते हैं ना सीट, वो भी नहीं देता था प्रभु।
प्रभु, उसका धन तो उधर ही मिल चुका है। नौकरी में चले गया।
खामोश महापापी!
हाँ प्रभु, भ्रष्टाचार के आरोप में इसे नौकरी से हाथ धोना पड़ा। बाद में रेलवे का कॉन्ट्रैक्टर बन गया प्रभु। बाद में बिना कुछ बनाए बिना भवन पुनर्निर्माण किए बिल पास करवा लेता था प्रभु।
बस
नहीं प्रभु,
क्या महापापी,
मैं पाप नहीं करा,
ऐसा बारे में
मैं पाप नहीं करा प्रभु, मैं सब लोगों का अच्छा ही करा प्रभु। एक औरत का सेटलमेंट दिलाया था, एक SBI नहीं आया तो उसको लोन दिलाया, मैं सबको अच्छा ही करा। वो करने के बाद थोड़ा पैसे देता तो मैं ऐसा जो में लगा लिया, गलत है क्या?
वही काम में तुम्हारी बहन रहेगी तो इसी करने का करने चित्रगुप्त
जी प्रभु,
इस महापापी को खड़ी से खड़ी सजा दिया जाए,
जैसी आपकी इच्छा।
ताकि सबको सबक मिलेगा।
नहीं,
हाँ चित्रगुप्त,
प्रभु प्रभु,
न्याय सूत्र के अनुसार इस सब पापियों को किया गया गुनाह सब दिखाने के बाद दंड किया जाए।
जैसी आपकी इच्छा प्रभु। पिछले जन्म में क्या क्या काम किया तुझे यम दर्पण में मैं दिखा रहा हूँ, लेकिन इससे पहले तू ये जो गड़बड़ किया है ना, इसके लिए तुझे मैं जम से सिफारिश करके 2 साल तक तुझे तेलुगु सिनेमा का टीवी सीरियल दिखाऊंगा।
ऐसा मत करो।
दर्पण में तू किए हुए सजा देखे। ओम यमाय नमः, ओम यमाय नमः, ओम यमाय नमः।
बच्चे के साथ आओ, किसी के साथ आओ, पास वाले से टीटी बात नहीं करता।
टिकट कंफर्म करा के देना।
टिकट बस नहीं है बोला ना, मैं तुम्हारा क्या है इसमें? वेटिंग लिस्ट में जरा देख के बता दो। वेटिंग लिस्ट नहीं कंफर्म नहीं होगा।
साहब थोड़ा देखिए, कंफर्म करा के देना।
पैसे दो 200
नहीं आज क्या है ना सर,
जल्दी दो माँ 200 रुपए दो।
मेरे तो पास है लेकिन टिकट पास खत्म हो गया।
बच रहे जाओ।
इमरजेंसी है प्लीज।
पैसा दो ना, अर्जेंसी दो, जल्दी अर्जेंसी गाड़ी चलाया करो तो।
हाँ सर बोल रहे ना। अच्छा ये 200 रुपया।
S4 में 45 में बैठो।
क्या रेलवे वाला को भी नहीं
बच्चों के साथ आए लगेगी ऐसा बहुत।
मैडम बच्चों के साथ आए थे नहीं, पति के साथ आए थे, मैं कुछ नहीं कर सकता। वेटिंग लिस्ट क्लियर नहीं हुआ, कुछ भी नहीं कर सकता। पैसे है आपके पास? दो 200 रुपए। हाँ जल्दी दो, वो भी दूसरों का बर्थ दे रहा हूँ आपको मैं। ये लो, ये S4 में 45 में बैठो, ये दूसरों मेरा नाम बोलना। पुकड़ क्या बोल रहे हैं? पुकड़ का चाय पीना और दिखा देखो ऐसा चाहिए।
ये मेरा टिकट जरा देखो कंफर्म हो।
अरे अभी बोला ना कंफर्म नहीं हुआ बोल के।
8 दिन के बताओ ना।
अरे ये तो कंफर्म हो चुका है।
हाँ, तो?
और ये बर्थ मैडम को दे दिया, उनको बहुत मुश्किल में है। ये काम करो, आप मेरा बर्थ में बैठ लो, मैं दूसरा बर्थ देता हूँ।
How can you give my birth to others when it is confirmed?
अरे भाई मिस्टेक है जीवन भाई, व्हाट इज दिस टू मच? आपको बर्थ दे रहा हूँ मैं, जाओ आपके मेरे सीट में बैठो।
ठीक है, आपका पूरा EFT और रमजान पूरा दिखा।
रमजान EFT
हाँ।
ये सब क्यों बोलते हो? वो लो
I am Business Inspector विवेकानंद।
वो आपका बिजनेस अवेयरनेस नहीं चल रहा है, नहीं है?
हाँ निकालिए।
साहब आप उधर गए बोलिए, मैं धंधा शुरू करा था। आप इधर आ गए।
आप जैसा लोगों को पकड़ने के लिए मैं आया हूँ।
साहब
ठीक है।
एक बात सुनो, आपने में तो 2 बार पकड़ चुके साहब, इस बार पकड़ेंगे ना मैं बिल्कुल काटा तक पहुंच जाऊंगा। उसके लिए एक बात सुनो, ये बात छोड़ो।
2 बार पकड़े तो भी तुम्हारा रिलीज नहीं हुआ।
क्या करें साहब, बीवी है, बच्चे है, क्या करना बोलो।
तो ठीक है,
हाँ।
तुम्हारा पूरा पैसा कितना लिया वो पैसे के पास पूरा।
साहब एक गाड़ी में आया ना साहब, वो ले गया साहब, सामने बैठ के बात करेंगे।
अभी तीसरा बार घर जाएगा ना, तब अकेला बैठ कर पी जाओ। ठीक है,
ऐसा है?
पहला ये
आपको मनमोहन सिंह मालूम है?
वो सब नाम लेके तुम क्या बोल रहे हैं?
हाँ।
साइन करो इधर प्रोसीडिंग्स में।
साइन करना पड़ेगा।
हाँ, बात
ठीक है कर लो, कितना साइन ले लो, क्या करना है तो कर लो, जाओ। अच्छा आगे बंद करो।
क्यों?
नहीं पूछती हो मुझे?
अरे ठीक है, क्यों इतने जल्दी आ गए ऑफिस से?
क्यों?
ये घंटा हो गया ना ऑफिस जाके?
जल्दी आना मना है क्या?
अरे मना तो नहीं, लेकिन क्यों जल्दी आए आप?
तुमसे जो प्यार करता हूँ इतने,
Oh God.
आगे बंद करो ना।
हाँ ठीक है, आगे बंद कर लिया, बोलिए क्या बात?
हाथ फैलाओ अपना, ये लो सोफा। हाँ, हैप्पी बर्थडे टू यू,
Oh, thank you.
हैप्पी बर्थडे टू यू।
बस बस। अरे मेरे लिए लेके आए या नहीं तो सर्वेंट के लिए लेके आए?
कितना प्यार से लेके आया तुम, ऐसा बोलती हो?
अरे ये प्यार बात सुन सुन के बोर हो गया जिंदगी में। अरे ये साड़ी तो देखिए कितना अच्छा है। मेरे डैडी ने मेरे बर्थडे के लिए 3500 रखी, इसको तोहफा भेजे मुझे।
देखो देखो,
ये पकड़ लीजिए।
कभी भी पैसे के साथ दूध क्यों तोड़ती हो तुम?
ऑफिस
मैं
किससे?
कितना प्यार से लेके आया तुम्हारे
अरे
लिए।
दुनिया है पैसों का, फिर क्या बोलते हैं आप? ये पैसों से तो बस बस ज्यादा बातें मत कीजिए। नेक्स्ट बर्थडे तक यही काम करना पड़ता है। ये फ्लैट देखिए ना, वो फ्लैट मुझे चाहिए बस।
उसका दाम जानती हो कितना है?
कितना है?
40 लाख। कहाँ से लेके आओ?
हाँ, कहाँ से लेकर? सब लोग कहाँ से लेके आ रहे हैं? आप भी वैसा लेके आ रहे हैं?
अरे मैं तो छोटा मोटा नौकरी करता हूँ रेलवे में, तो 40 लाख नहीं, वो बाजू में है ना वो 15 लाख वाला, वो
नहीं,
देख लेंगे।
एक काम कीजिए ना,
हाँ।
एक 1 लाख लेते एक हट ले लीजिए बस।
कितना प्यार से लेके आया है साड़ी तुम्हारे बहू के लिए, उसको पसंद नहीं आया।
अच्छा बोलिए क्या बोल रहे हैं? अभी 1 महीने का एडवांस कुछ दे दी मेरे से। हाँ तो
ये आप 3000 रुपये रखिए आप।
3000?
हाँ
हाँ फिर बाकी का पैसा?
मैं बाकी का पैसा शाम में एडवांस और रेंट पूरा बैलेंस आपको शाम में दूंगी।
ठीक है तो जूस पी के जाइए ना।
नहीं मैं
अच्छा चाय पी के जाइए।
कुछ भी जरूरत नहीं है।
अच्छा पानी का भी जरूरत नहीं?
कुछ भी जरूरत नहीं।
ठीक है।
ऐसा मत बोलो मैडम, आप बोल रहे हैं सत्यनारायण का बीबी है वो। हाँ? देखो ये सत्यनारायण का केस है, लेकिन आपको 1 रुपया भी इसमें से मिलने वाला नहीं है। ये सेटलमेंट का पैसा आपको आता ही नहीं, पेंशन भी नहीं आता, सेटलमेंट का पैसा नहीं आता, DCR भी नहीं आता, कुछ भी नहीं आता आपको। आप क्यों ऐसा मेरे पीछे पड़े? क्यों क्या? ये देखो ये उनका SR है ना, इसमें आपका फोटो नहीं है, किसी और का फोटो है।
अरे ऐसा कैसे हो सकता?
अरे दूसरे औरत का फोटो लगाया तो ये लोग। हाँ, इनके उनके स्टेटमेंट में सेकंड डेथ सर्टिफिकेट है। मैडम आप नहीं है, आपका डेथ सर्टिफिकेट है इधर।
ऐसा मत करो सर, मेरे 3 बच्चे हैं सर, एक बेटी का शादी करना है सर मुझे। ऐसा मत बोलो सर, मेरी मदद करो सर।
आपके हस्बैंड ऐसा सर्टिफिकेट दिया, मैं क्या कर सकता हूँ बोलो?
ऐसा मत बोलो सर, आप ही बताओ।
हम आपका सेटलमेंट हम जरूर दिलाएंगे, आप चिंता मत करिए। बैठिए
भाई ये
सर, बैठिए।
ठीक है, कुछ मदद करो भाई, मदद करो।
देखा मानव, ऐसा सवाल तुम्हारे गलतियों का?
हाँ प्रभु, ऐसा हो गया कि आप अधर्मराज है।
अधर्मराज नहीं है, धर्मराज समवर्ती। आपसे किया गया पाप और पुण्य का संतुलन करके आपका जीवन को सार्थकता दिलाने का सौभाग्य मुझे विधाता ने सौंपा है। ये आप समझ नहीं सकते।
यम जी, आप क्या कहे संतुलन? कहाँ संतुलन हुआ है? मेरे साथ जो पाप करा है वो नीचे बीवी बच्चों के साथ आराम से जिंदगी गुजर रहा है, मैं इनको ऊपर लाके इधर खड़ा कर दिया।
जातस्य मरणम ध्रुवम,
हाँ,
जातस्य मरणम ध्रुवम, उसका आयु अभी भी बाकी है। ये पापी उसी आदमी के से मैं सारा संसार को भी एक संदेश देना चाहता हूँ। यदि उस संगठन को देखने के बाद कोई ना कोई अगर परिवर्तित हो गए तो मेरा संकल्प सफल हो जाएगा। चित्रगुप्त जी महाराज, उसका जीवन में क्या हो रहा है वो भी बता दिया जाए,
जैसी हम
कांड किया जाए।
ओम यमाय नमः, ओम यमाय नमः, ओम यमाय नमः।
माँ जी देखिए, मेरे पति से पहले आपका बेटा है। अरे सब लोग मुझे भी नौकरानी के साथ साथ सब लोग पूछ रहे मुझे भी, आपका हस्बैंड सस्पेंड हो गया था, आपका हस्बैंड जेल में गया था, मैं क्या करूं? अरे आपका बेटा है, आप थोड़ा सा ये नहीं दिए ना, मैं क्या करूं?
हाँ बेटा, मैं ये नालायक निकला तेरा पति।
मेरे रिलेटिव्स में भी मेरा पूरा रेस्टोरेंट चले गया। माँ जी मैं अब चले जाता हूँ, मैं रहने वाली हूँ मैं अभी।
मम्मी, मैं इस तरह से नहीं जाऊंगा। तो भैया ने अरे कैंटीन गए तो चाय पीने के लिए, तो सब लोग आप पूछ रहे थे क्या क्या भाई जेल चलेगा, सस्पेंड कर दिए? तो ये तो आपके पति को समझा सकते ना?
हाँ मैं अकेले सबको मिल रही हूँ। हाँ सबको मैं समझाऊँ? अरे कितने समझाए तो मैं तुम्हारा भाई है।
मेरे को पता नहीं, मैं इस घर में एक में रहता था। मम्मी, आपके बेटे आइए, स्वागत बोलिए, आपके पति का स्वागत बोलिए।
आइए आपके लिए बातें हो रहा है। जेल से आराम से आ रहे हैं अभी।
चोर जैसा ऐसे क्यों देख रहे हो? सब लोग तुम चोर जैसे क्यों देख रहे हो?
चोर जैसे देख रहे? अरे सब लोग दुनिया में कुछ भी नहीं कर रहे। आप जैसे सस्पेंड हो जाना, जेल में जाना, अरे मेरा तो सब रेस्पेक्ट चले गया।
ये सब मैं तुम्हें सुखी देखने के लिए तो किया था। हाँ, सिर्फ तुम लोगों के सुखी के लिए किया था मैं।
मेरे सुख के लिए? अरे फ्लैट मेरे अकेले के लिए पूछी क्या? सब फैमिली के लिए नहीं पूछी? एक सब लोगों का सुख नहीं, आपका सुख नहीं, सिर्फ मेरा ही ये सुख हमेशा मेरे ऊपर ही बस।
ऐसा क्यों बोलते हो? तुम लोगों के सुख देखने के लिए मैं पैसा कमाने के लिए ऐसा काम किया।
माँ जी देख लीजिए, अब बात कर लीजिए आपके बेटे।
क्या मेरे गहने टूटवाने को कहा, मतलब जेल जाने को कहा ना? अरे कारण तेरे किचरे का पाप का पता नहीं।
इतना सारा पैसा मैं कहाँ से लेके आऊंगा? मैं तो पूछा था मुझे, नौकरी के तरक्की के लिए पूछा था ना? नौकरी की तारीखी के लिए पूछा तो कैसे भ्रष्टाचार करने को नहीं कहा। तो इस घर में मैं नहीं रहूंगा। चलो मैं पैसे कहाँ से होगा?
अच्छा है।
पैसे कहाँ से?
अब बहुत अच्छा करना, सब लोग चले गया, मैं अकेले आपको मिल गई ना। मैं तो ये पुलिस में घर में रहने वाली हूँ। तेरे पिताजी कब से बुला रही है वहाँ आने के लिए।
मैं वो लोग गए इसे आदमी में।
मुझे कभी भी एक घर में मुझे नहीं लेके आना। मैं करके जाऊँ।
तुम मुझे छोड़ के मत जाओ।
नहीं।
प्लीज तुम मुझे छोड़ के मत जाओ।
मैं चले जाऊँ।
शादी
छोड़ दीजिए मुझे, मैं चले जाती हूँ। हाँ नहीं।
तुमने शादी में वादा किया था।
क्या वादा किया?
सुख दुख में साथ देगी करके वादा किया था।
हाँ हाँ मेरे लिए आप भी वादा किया, लेकिन मुझे क्या सुख दिए? पूरा दुख मेरे सब रिलेटिव्स के सामने मेरी इज्जत पर चले जाना। मैं ये पता मैं ये घर में नहीं रहती हूँ, चले जाइए।
ये सब
सही है। काम क्रोध लोभ से कमाकर जीवन से सब पैसा नहीं कमाकर सुख शांति से जीने के लिए कोशिश करो और भ्रष्टाचार का छोड़ो। जब ये पृथ्वी स्वर्गतुल्य बनेगा।
I'd like to tell you, sir, that these artists are all our staff working in various departments of South Central Railway. Now, I would like to request the skate artists to kindly introduce themselves.
This view, we did our best, and I would like to introduce my artist. And first, Emerald J. Srinivas. Chitragut Madhumata Thakur. Madhu, husband character, T.M. Madhusudan from Accounts Department. And it has been directed by me, and thank you for the encouragement. Thank you so much.
I now request Shri J. Harinarayan, Chief Secretary, Government of Andhra Pradesh and Chief Guest for today, to kindly come on to the dais. Sir has the distinction of being the District Collector of 3 districts, Kittadrama, and Kittadrama district. He served in various ministries and in various capacities as Commissioner, Chief Supplies, Vice Chairman and Managing Director, Department of Industries, Government of AP, and many other prestigious assignments in the Ministries of Food and Civil Supplies, Department of Irrigation, Energy and Power. Prior to being the Chief Secretary, he was the Secretary to the Government of India in the Ministry of Water Resources. The rich experience gathered by him made him the natural choice as the chief guest for today's function. Thank you, sir, for consenting to be the chief guest today. Our General Manager, Shri H.K. Pali, needs no introduction. It is under his benign presence this function is being organized. I also welcome our SDGM, Shri R. Vijay Mohan, who is the main director of the United Defense Department, onto the stage. As some great philosopher remarked, a flower's appeal lies in its contradictions. So delicate in form, yet strong in fragrance. So small in size, yet so big in beauty. So short in life, but yet long on effect. With this in mind, I request our General Manager, Shri H.K. Pali, to kindly present a bouquet to the Chief Guest. Our SDGM, Shri Vijay Mohan, will present a bouquet to the General Manager. Shri P.V. Rajshekhar, Deputy CEO SMG, will present a bouquet to SDGM. I now request our Chief Guest to light the lamp of light to dispel the darkness.
In welcoming you all on the occasion of Vigilance Awareness Week being observed between 12th to 16th of November as per the directives of CDC. During this week-long observation, Vigilance Branch sensitizes the employees on the hazards of effects of corruption and need to contain the same. Development of any country or society is dependent on a number of factors, and corruption is figuring as one of them. It therefore attains importance, and every year Vigilance Awareness Week is being observed, and during this period the messages are being received right from President of India, Vice President, Prime Minister and other important officials. The subject of corruption is so important that the foreign direct investment is dependent upon the corruption indices of a nation. India has been figuring somewhere in the middle order, around 72 in the total reckoning of 148 countries, for which the Transparency International has been conducting survey. And Railways being the largest government employer, it is expected to play a pivotal role in the corruption awareness. The areas of corruption in railways are mostly related to the tenders, contracts, traffic undercharges, staff payments, scrap disposal, etc. With the advancement of technology, novel methods of corruption practices are being devised, and as such, practices can only be countered only through increased transparency and making system improvement to prevent possibility of manipulations. We started this week with pledge on 12th of this month, and today we have started a program with a small skit on corruption and its efforts thereof. We have with us Shri Harinaran, Chief Secretary of UP, as our chief guest. He is distinguished officer of 1970 batch of IS and known for his high levels of integrity and honesty, which are hallmarks of his professionalism. I welcome you all again for this function. Thank you.
On the occasion of the Vigilance Awareness Week, a vigilance bulletin is usually prepared, which will now be released by the chief guest. Departments. System improvements introduced as a result of vigilance advice has also been incorporated.
The respected Sri J. Harinaran, Chief Secretary, Government of Andhra Pradesh, Sri Vijay Mohan, Senior CGM, South Central Railway, AGM, Sri P.C. Kumar, colleagues and friends. Right at the outset, I would like to express my gratitude to Sri J. Harinaran, Chief Secretary, Government of Andhra Pradesh, for having given his consent and also making it to this particular occasion for the Vigilance Awareness Week. In fact, he was so kind as to accept our invitation readily, and he has taken out such a large chunk of his time for this occasion. I am grateful to you, sir. This week, as all of us know, is being observed with the express aim of educating our officers and staff regarding the devastating effects of corruption
the organization. Indeed, for any organization, corruption is a menace. It's a disease which hits into the very vitals of the organization's fabric. It is also a fact that the organizations also imbibe whatever is happening around them elsewhere. We are all products of the same society from which we come and also are influenced by it. As the script indicated, there are pressures of different kinds, starting right from the family to that of the peers and friends and many other factors. But to my mind, the need for the awareness has got to be emphasized more because of the rise, rather the pressures of consumerism which we are facing as of now. The increase has led to different kinds of aspirations for better life. The society around us certainly has got many allurements, and therefore the people running any organization have got to immune themselves to ward off the allurements that are available. That can happen only with the organization itself being very, very aware of what are its weaknesses and how they can be taken care of. To that effect, in an organization like railways, which is very large, very well spread out, the challenges are really different considering the public dealings, considering the very large quantity of resources, rather the amounts of money that is being spent on the different developmental works. So therefore, it is not only necessary to emphasize on the probity part, it is also necessary to have a very strong vigilance organization which, cutting across the organization, should be able to find out areas of weakness and suggest ways of plugging apart from booking the culprits. To that effect, I must say that the Railway Vigilance Organization is one of the most effective. That doesn't mean that we can sit up on our laurels. The number of instances which come to light regarding irregularities probably are a very small fraction. It could be the tip of the iceberg, as they say. So therefore, it is incumbent on the departments themselves to strengthen their own machinery through adequate inspections to find fault. Necessarily the inspections have got to find fault and take measures to plug them. No one can be a better vigilance officer than the organization's own personnel, particularly the officers and supervisors of that particular organization. and the efforts of our departments to plug the loopholes, we shall be able to make a big dent in whatever areas where we have this particular weakness. We also have a public interface. The organization's image, the railway's image itself is affected by the behavior of our staff. Apart from the behavior, the pressures for gratification, illegal gratification is another area of concern. That is of course one of the most talked about areas, but yet we can't say with our hand on our heart that we have been able to take care of all our weaknesses in this area completely. The fact that we are organizing this awareness week itself indicates that there is a weakness in the system, and that can be taken care of only if there are efforts from within to stem it out. During the particular week that we are observing, the Vigilance Awareness Week, I am sure we shall come across many suggestions and ideas with which we can combat this menace. With this, I would like to thank the Senior DGM and his team for organizing this, and also the Chief Secretary for making it together. I thank you all.
Mr. Party, General Manager, Deputy General Manager, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the organizing body which has organized this meeting this morning. A few days ago when Mr. Party rang up to invite me to participate in this function, I was really very touched and very happy to accept for two reasons. Firstly, in a sense, I too am part of the railway family. My father was in the railways. He retired in 1970. So for the greater part of my formative years, I used to be very familiar with the railway way of life, and we all used to cherish it and love it beyond measure. And in fact, when I first joined the Indian Administrative Service and General Governance, I used to think that there is nothing in this service which can compare anyway with the kind of service and the kind of organization the Indian Railways was. In many ways, I still believe that. So, when Mr. Party, on behalf of his organization, invited me to be here this morning, I was very, very happy to be here, and I thank you, Mr. Party, for having given me this opportunity. Though it's a very awkward subject to deal with, it's a subject which is not mentioned in polite life conversation. It is not something we should really talk about. It is actually having a look at our own ulcers, and that's not a very pretty sight. But it has to be done. As Mr. Party correctly said, we've come to a situation in our social, cultural, and managerial life when we have to have an awareness week to ensure that we actually look at the ulcer and hopefully we can treat with it like an expert surgeon. But this was not always the case. If you go back in time, the problem of corruption really started in public services and so forth around the Second World War. At that time there were a lot of shortages in the economy, and at that time the entire process, which we saw illustrated in the skit, the beginnings of that process were laid then. There was also a managerial approach to corruption in those days, which we don't find today. Like today, when we look back, we see that we believe that the colonial administration was steel frame and so on, was incorruptible. But in actual fact, that is not very true. In actual fact, what used to happen during the colonial days was, and this would happen only for the senior officers, only for the senior officers. That is, that if senior officers were caught in matters which we would now say vigilance cases, he was given a choice that he either resign with his pension or he would be prosecuted or departmental action taken and his pension would definitely be stopped. Most persons chose to resign. So if you have a look at civil services across organizations, right from, let us say, if you start from serious organization from about 1920 or so, you'll find a very large number of senior officials actually resigning. And that is because in all those cases they were threatened that either they lose their pension or they can go home with pension. That unfortunately is not the case today. Several private companies follow that policy even today. And I think that may be something which we need to look at. Later on, I think the first vigilance commission in the railways was the Kittadrama Commission, which was set up sometime in 1956, which made several recommendations. And at about that time, we had the Mundara scandal involving the investments by the Life Insurance Corporation. As a follow-up of the Mundara Corporation scandal, the government set up the Santaram Committee. And it's the Santaram Committee which really constituted the Central Vigilance Commission and the entire articulation of a vigilance commissionary process across all government bodies at the centre and subsequently at the state governments. Parallelly, around 50s, there was a realization that there's a lot of white-collar crime which requires to be addressed. And so you had the Delhi Special Police Establishment, which was created. And within the Home Ministry, there was a corruption cell which was set up. And sometime in 1963-64, both these institutions were put together and the Central Bureau of Investigation was created. So by and large, starting from about 1950 and so on, by the time a whole administrative apparatus was set up to tackle white-collar crimes and so on, the Corruption Act was passed in 1947. All these things took place, and finally, around 64-65, the articulation of the whole system which we see today has been in place. And since then, various attempts have been made to deepen, widen, and improve the vigilance aspects of administration. But when we look at vigilance aspects of administration, we must realize firstly that it's a fault of the administration. And when I say that, I see that very clearly in the setup of which, say, in the state government, where it becomes even more glaring. There is a certain incident which certainly raises vigilance issues. There's a complaint, there's a reporting of that matter. By the time that matter, a decision is taken as whether, we're going to do this or that or investigate this or that, it takes a long time. So then an investigation starts. Investigation itself takes a much longer time. And after the investigation is over, to get to a decision, that takes even longer time. And let us say finally a decision of imposing a certain punishment is actually imposed. It may be about 10 years from the event, 15 years from the event. And then what happens? That punishment is not final. I don't know how it is in the railway organization, but I certainly find in the state government it's amazing. The punishment is imposed on a person. And then there is a provision, of course, for an appeal. Let's say the appeal is rejected. After that, every time somebody comes, or there's a change in government, or he manages to get some other influential person or someone catch the decision maker in some function or some weak moment, another petition will come, mercy petition, another mercy petition. So you'll have about 15 of them till finally he gets the decision he wants. That is, most of this punishment is absorbed. So there seems to be a running race, it's a marathon race in terms of just the stamina of the person. And most organizations don't have that stamina at this end. Of course, at the person who's receiving their given punishment, that's his whole life, and he'll pursue it relentlessly. So to some extent we'll have to watch and look at our management processes, even in tackling the cases which we do have to manage. And I think unless we set that right, a good part of this vigilance activity which we pursue, I think will be perhaps not as effective as it ought to be. The second thing which I find, Mr. Padi, again, as I would say, I have little and no knowledge about the railway system. I can only talk from my experience in other governmental organizations which I have seen. And that is, our accounting systems are very weak. When I say very weak, I mean that the accounting system is not really a tool for management. Modern accounting systems actually use the accounts information, financial information, as tools for managing whatever activity one is charged with. Typically in government, our accounts is only to ensure what is the budget and how much is expended. And that's it. The rest of what the accounts might reveal is seldom really investigated, examined, and so on. This is unlike the case where you actually have to manage. Where one has to actually manage things, then you need to keep track of these accounts. Otherwise, it's not possible to manage. To some extent, the way in which we are organizing our financial accounting and the management of the administration is to a large extent the root cause for a lackadaisical approach to work and hence a rise in the entire phenomenon of what we call injurious. I'll give you an example. In the state governments, for example, the district collector used to be a district collector. In principle, we are supposed to produce a budget which says, so much for salary, so much for TA, so much for the petrol, blah, 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 so much for new things, and so on. We set it up, and so on. It gets agglomerated. The whole budget is prepared. Once the budget is prepared, it is actually managed by the finance department. Having done so, this district collector person who was supposed to be managing the budget doesn't feel any further responsibility to manage the budget. So at the end of the year, we have situations where TA bills will pile up because the TA provisions have nothing to do with what is being the claim. And the TA claim doesn't match with this because he never realized that he was supposed to sanction the TA in the first place. So in other words, a certain responsibility which he was supposed to discharge, he has not done. That's because our system of accounting and the budgetary processes which we have developed doesn't allow for it. I think we need to look at that. If you look at a private company, for example, there's a manager. Let's say he's managing the sale of certain advanced electronic equipment. That particular, he may be an all-India manager, a divisional manager, sub-India manager, Asia manager, whatever. He's given a certain budget. Yeah, okay, for travel for your personal, this is it. So it's up to him whether he's going to sanction that particular TA bill or not. So the question of a TA bill not being or piling up, etc., doesn't arise. Similarly, it is so for every one of his activities. In other words, a budgetary process is so involved that a person who is supposed to be managing it actually manages it. It is not as if it's a subordinate function, or actually, it's the function which is hived off to the finance department or some other department. No. It's the mainline manager who is responsible for delivery of a certain result who ought to be managing it. The reason why I dwelt a little bit about this is, ultimately, when we say a corrupt society, or let's say a vigilance problem, as was mentioned here, the Vigilance International's reports which are published, they base their corruption index reports on 3 statistical calculations. One is they run a questionnaire on experts in the field or experts dealing with that particular organization and get their perception report. That's one. The second thing what they do is they do a sample of the consumers who utilize that particular service, and again raise a question. Is it corrupt this time? And third, they look at if it's an institution which typically at a country level, foreign companies may be investing in a country. Let's say some company in America may want to invest in India, something like that. So what they do is they run a survey with the large companies in the world outside the country and ask them their experience in terms of corruption in investing in the country. So it's largely a perception game. And I would think that in an organization such as the railways, which is far more public and direct in the kind of services and goods and public goods which it offers to a given clientele, I think that nexus is sharper. And perhaps for that reason, empowering your managers might be a way to go forward in this. I would say that there are issues in all this, and for that reason, there is a lot of threat in organizations to organizations such as bodies, typically government bodies. If you have a look across the world, there is a growing belief that perhaps corruption will take upon such dimensions that it will defeat the very purpose of the organization. And this happened in several societies. At a societal level, we need to have a look at it. In fact, in the Kittadrama report, which is the first report of the Indian Railways on corruption and vigilance, they had the view, the report holds the view, that the responsibility for corruption is societal, much like what this skit was saying. But to some extent that is passing the buck. There may be a truth in it, I do recognize there may be a truth in it, but to some extent, it certainly is passing the buck. That is, in this case, for example, in the skit, the guy who was the employee took no responsibility, he blamed it on the poor wife. Of course, that's quite common in India, we always tend to blame our wives for everything or somebody else. But nevertheless, there might be a certain truth in it. But we need to take a look as to whether that's a real truth or only a perceived truth, if you are willing to accept it. I would say, and in this regard I'd like to give you a parable, and that is the parable of the mason. And I think ultimately it's a question of whether one would like to live up to the promises one has made and discharge that responsibility as best as one can. I hope, gentlemen, that one day we will all be members of organizations which build temples, and I'm quite sure, and I look forward to the day, the kind of leadership that your top management is providing, that indeed such temples would be built, and perhaps it might even start right here in this Ray William in Hyderabad city. I'd like to thank you very much.
And managers, coupled with enforcing a sense of responsibility and accountability in them, will go a long way in enforcing a corrupt-free organization. As a small token of gratitude, the South Central Railway would like to present a memento to our Chief Guest for having graced this function with august presence. Sir, this is a miniature coach which is being manufactured in-house in one of our workshops at I now come to the end of today's function. I hope all of you have enjoyed today's function. Before I conclude, I'd like to thank and express my heartfelt gratitude to Shri J. Harinarayan, Chief Secretary, Government of AP, for having consented to be with us today. I thank our General Manager, Shri H.K. Pali, for presiding over the function. Thanks are due to AGMs and other PHODs who attended the function today. I also wish to thank the technical departments like SMT, Electrical and IRCTC for the logistical support. Thank you.